So I'm going to hand it over to Barbee. I'm going to get you guys back there some chairs. And everyone, let's welcome our panelists.
Fantastic. I don't know if, is the mic on? Yeah, fantastic. Oh, go for it.
I forgot this one. Okay. If I could please kindly, with all the kindness, ask everyone over there to please be quiet. No, if you have conversations, can you take them out to the hallway? We are streaming this. We have about 150 people watching the stream, and the noise in the background picks up on the stream. So if you're in conversations, if you could just please take them to the hallway, we appreciate it. With that being said, we are back live. So let's one more time welcome the panelists.
I love how we asked for quiet and it didn't get quiet. I'm going to reiterate, and I love how this is so much louder now. If people are having conversation in the area, please take the conversation to another area so that we can make sure that we have a good focus in the conversation that we're having here. I appreciate it. I did make the joke last year that they shouldn't give me a mic, and then they gave me a permanent one. So, hi. Thank you so much for coming out, staying with us, having some fun today. Thank you, of course, to Kim and FutureCon and to all the vendors. It really does make a difference whenever we can come together as a community and have conversation. I love this panel. I've been coming to FutureCons for a really long time, before I was a CISO, before I could be on the panel, where I was just in the audience learning from other people. So I really appreciate. Again, if we could just have conversations in the outside room and not the inside room, please. Appreciate it.
Again, test. Again, we're getting so much feedback from the conversations in the sponsor room. If I could please kindly ask everyone to take your conversations out in the hallway if you're not participating in the panel, because our audience cannot hear. Thank you, but please, I still hear a lot of noise back there. Josh. Who can be my bouncer and go stop that noise back there? That was awesome.
Hey, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Fantastic. So thank you again, FutureCon and Kim, for having us and for putting events like this on so that we can come together and learn and also have some fun conversations. So my name is Barbee Mooneyhan. I have been in IT for over 20 years now. I've been in CyberSecurity for around 6, and I am VP of Security, IT, and Privacy at a mental health company. And I love these conversations, so I look forward to it. I actually requested that we are not at a podium, and this is more of a conversation base, so that we can kind of get down to more of this topic instead of like me asking questions and the call and response type of thing. So hopefully you all like the way that we're gonna do this year. But yeah, so Barbee Mooneyhan, love to be here, and I'm going to let the panelists start introducing themselves.
Thank you. Marc Johnson. I've been in the industry also for over 20 years, have been a CIO, a CISO, have run different practices and so forth across many different industries. I have been in healthcare and in security for the last 10 to 15.
Hello, I'm Melissa Page. I am the Director of IT and Security at Cumberland University. I've been in IT for a little over 16 years now. I've been in manufacturing, obviously education, and also a little bit of healthcare.
I'm Roger Brotz, CISO of Acadia Healthcare. I've been in the industry for almost 4 decades, so I'm the oldest one on the panel apparently. about 30 years in healthcare specifically, but I know the only reason why there's so many people here is because we're between them and the prizes. Usually it's between them and the alcohol, but it's even better that they're getting some alcohol. So I'm just going to recommend that in order to keep the engagement going here and for everybody to kind of be tuned into this is we're going to play a little drinking game. So anytime anybody on the panel says AI or zero trust, everybody's got to take a drink. So let's try it out right now. AI. AI. Come on, people. Okay. All right.
That's wonderful. The other thing that I just want to cover real quick is that these are the personal views of our own, not necessarily discredited or credited to the companies that we represent, and also no legal advice. We are not your personal lawyers, so make sure you talk to a personal lawyer. Just had to kind of get that out of the way so we make sure that we have full disclaimers here. So one of the first topics, like we sat down, we had a conversation, what's top of our mind, what do we want to talk about with all of you today? So one of the first things that we talked about is, of course, resiliency, because I think for a really long time, we've focused on security, right? Confidentiality, integrity, and availability, but how does that play into how the company continues to operate in the event of an issue, right? That's effectively what we need to do, is to make sure that we're supporting the business through a bad event and make sure that they're able to continue to operate. So Marc, let me know a little bit about your opinion on that topic.
Excellent. Yeah, absolutely. So it's a passion of mine to say we need to be resilient at the business level. Now, you heard in multiple presentations today, Veeam to the keynote with Lee and Black Fog and Myriad 360. It's about the restoration. It's about how you recover from an incident. But we need to be clear. There are different responsibilities that today have been thrown over the wall to IT and IT security. So let me ask, just by a raising of hands, how many of you or your direct IT equivalent are responsible for doing a business impact analysis? Okay, that's probably 30%. What's ironic about that? You have no responsibility in the business impact analysis. What you're doing is getting the business to tell you what the responsibility should be. But in fact, it's their responsibility to tell you, like some of our presenters said, what are those critical assets? Now, I'm not trying to say that you aren't good at being able to identify it, but often within IT, we identify critical assets by how many people scream and how loud they scream. And that's not always the case, right? So I advocate for the fact that the business needs to understand what that is so that we, through disaster recovery, can then understand the priorities of what needs to be restored, when it needs to be restored. Then comes the element of linking it to incident response, which is purely an IT security thing, right? If we can't return to doing business, we haven't done ourselves any favors, nor have we done anything well for our customers. In healthcare, could mean that a patient dies. Any thoughts?
So I agree with everything you say, obviously, but another important factor of making sure that your organization can recover from the breach when it happens is making sure that you have an incident response plan, and it's not just the IT's responsibility in this incident response plan. Everyone in your organization has their place in this incident response plan, and it needs to be put in there, and they need to be reviewing it and understanding it with you. Your IT team can't run around and communicate with everybody while they're trying to resolve the issue. That doesn't work. We would be stretched way too thin. So there needs to be the contacts that are made aware in your incident response plan, and then they need to know what they do from there while you're continuing to work on the issues. So it's very important to make sure that those obligations are put in your incident response plan.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing a little bit of a shift too. Traditionally, it was IT for disaster recovery, right? So they were in that. I think what we're going to see a shift here very soon is that resiliency also comes into the cyberspace. So on the incident response, on the cybersecurity team, having positions specifically for resilience that are going to work very closely with IT and work with the business to make sure that they've got their business impact analysis and all that kind of stuff done. There needs to be, because otherwise there's a disconnect between each person and the silos that it creates if there's not continuity across all planes.
Yeah. And I think one of the important factors that we consider when we talk about resiliency is a lot of times we talk about disaster recovery, which is absolutely a conversation we need to know, we need to be able to be fluent in. But also, what are we doing while we're trying to recover? And does the business know what they're doing while we're trying to recover? Because there is a time period, and that's where resiliency comes in and where it's baked in. And sometimes we have to help those conversations along. Some companies have amazing resiliency conversations. They may even have teams, but sometimes we have to step in and have the conversation. And as IT leaders and as security leaders, we need to understand what their backup plans are, because we can't have single points of failure. We need to be able to understand if there is a critical function within the business, like example, finance, right? Main point of finance, paying your employees. You can't pay your employees, you might have some problems, right? So what's the people, processes, and technology that's involved in that, and making sure, of course, we talk about backups, right? But also what happens with the people, process, and technology if that technology becomes unavailable? Well, there's a whole lot more conversations to have than just, well, that technology becomes unavailable, we'll just move over to another one, right? Well, what do we do in the meantime while we're moving to the other one? How are we continuing that operation? And so there's a conversation in the business continuity and the impact to the business as it's going along, and understanding the functionality while you're going along throughout it. I was curious, open to additional. I see you with the mic, so I'm going to let you keep going.
As you can tell, this definitely is a passion of mine. The problem becomes one of duplicity. If we are developing incident command systems in IT security, and yet disaster recovery has a different incident command system, it's duplicative. It doesn't make any sense. They should be pointing to each other, right? It shouldn't be, I've got this plan, they've got that plan, and they've got their plan.
Yep.
And to the earlier point, we need to be able to understand how to do business without technology. We can still take care of patients. We can still take care of customers. Yeah, it's not fun, but you've got to do it. And you can do that manually. You can make change at the cashier drawer, right? You can still do business instead of throwing your hands up and saying, I'm out. But more importantly, it really comes down to testing it. So I'm going to say this, and it's going to be bold, but stop testing just one system to show the auditors you were successful. That means absolutely nothing, because it's all your upline and downline dependencies which will trip you up in that recovery when you have to do it. You should be treating this and the tabletops and so forth as a way to learn, instead of looking at it purely as, I got to check the box. Resiliency is up to all of us, not just IT, not just the business, not just security. It's up to all of us.
So I think 5% capacity is better than 0. If you think about it, especially, I come from heavily like healthcare delivery organizations and medical devices. 5% operational is better than 0% operational. And if you can just get to 5% in the meantime, then yes, maybe you have a reduction in abilities, but at least you're still moving. Whereas if you're not moving at all, it's so much more painful. So what about, do you want to say something else, or are you good? Okay. They were supposed to keep me up with talking about third-party risk management and supplier review. But yeah. So let's switch the topic then, and we'll talk about when we talk about resiliency, we talk about as well third party, we talk about the chain effect, and we're talking about how that could impact, especially in the middle of an incident, but also just in general security. So I want to dig further into that supplier chain or third party risk management conversation. Roger, let's go with you first.
Zero trust. Zero trust. Yeah, I mean, third party, I mean, you bring up a couple good points. There's a lot of different ways we can go with third party, right? Whether that's making sure that we have backups for things like Change Healthcare that happened, right? And we've got some supply chain issues, and we have backups to those vendors to make sure that we can be resilient as well. So there's a lot of that happening, and then just really kind of good hygiene around third party. So on the medical space, you know, we find a lot as we start our third party program is a lot of these vendors just don't have security around their tools. So they're creating this stuff, some of them out of the garages. It's kind of maybe they've got some equity in a firm, and they're building this new technology, and it's great. We see some great innovation, but in a lot of cases with the innovation doesn't come security, so they're not hand in hand. So I just encourage you to make sure that you kind of build in, as you look at kind of the cyber blocking and tackling components to your program, is really start to build in third-party risk into that, if for no other reason than to look at what security those folks have, and then ultimately, to your point, kind of work back with the business around, you know, what is that resiliency? If we can't get Q-tips, where else can we get them from? And do we have that contract in place? I think just organizing contracts and all that stuff becomes very important. We're finding, you know, just a lot of information's all over the place organizationally. Things aren't centralized when it comes to that, and then trying to find something in a disaster or during a resiliency exercise is just very difficult.
So let me dive into that comment you made about Change Healthcare. For most organizations that had an outage because of Change Healthcare, it had nothing to do with technology. Let me restate that. It had nothing to do with technology. Now you're going to grimace and say, no, it was because their technology wasn't available. No, the business decision that most organizations made is to single source that functionality. That's a pure business decision without the understanding of the risk associated with it. And that's what I'm driving towards when I say in the business resiliency, we need to drive the business to get to the risk and understand those critical assets and understand those critical functions so that business decisions can be made with the proper information about the risk. Third parties are a huge risk today. You're probably all familiar with Log4j and SolarWinds and all of those issues. Yes, they're important from a perspective of protecting you as the end user and your consumers. But more importantly, we need to drive the business to understand the risk. Now, I'm not one to go to a board and do the fire and brimstone with fear, uncertainty, and doubt. I feel that's a failing strategy in the long run. Yes, take advantage of any incident you possibly can to promote your opportunity, but from an overall perspective, we need to take that step back to say, look, we need to understand risk at its basic value for everything. And third parties right now is huge. Who's holding them accountable for bad code, for bad APIs? We've got solutions that can help point it out, but who's fixing it? So we need to advocate, like Lee did at the keynote, align business and IT. That doesn't mean business go off and do your own strategy and throw it over the wall to IT and say go, because there's generally 3 to 6 months lost at that point. We need to develop those strategies together so that in the end, whether it's we're doing the high availability or the incident command structure relative to an incident response plan, we're not bolting it on with a hurdle. It's already been included since the beginning with the strategy so that we can meet the same outcomes at the end. If they keep moving the goalpost, how are we going to get there?
Since we're talking about vendors and third-party risk management and stuff, sorry, vendors, there are several reasons why you need to double-check your vendors, and you need to be looking at your third parties, and you need to be checking their security risk. But one of the biggest things is, depending on your organization, you could legally be required to do this. There are several laws for universities that require us to do risk management for our vendors, to be reviewing our vendors and making sure they're following guidelines. One of those is GLBA for universities. If there's any other universities in here, you know exactly what that is. And so if we are not doing that, we are actually not abiding by the law. It's a federal law. We have to do it, and it could really put your business at risk.
Okay, so just a raise of hands. How many of you have been directly impacted by another company?
You mean like a security?
Event, yeah, a security event. Yep. How many of you have had to go at midnight or 11 a.m. all of a sudden, and now you're digging through your repositories trying to figure out, and you're digging through all of the different technology stacks to find out whether or not you've been impacted by the latest breach that just happened, right? Yeah, pretty much all of us. It is a, when we talk about supplier risk management and we talk about, because there is like a slight difference between supplier risk management, third-party risk management, but when we talk about those things, we really need to look at our integration components, right? We need to talk about how are we using it. We need to talk about what the relationship with the supplier is, what the conversations that we're having with the supplier are, doing our risk assessments. But I think one of the things that you touched on that I wholeheartedly agree with is that if we're not in the conversations earlier on with the business, right? This is business focused here. If we're not having the conversations to the business of what they're trying to meet and what they're trying to do and trying to help provide a secure solution for that, or help put guardrails up to the solution that they're trying to provide, and they understand what it is, we're gonna have shadow IT, right? Because they're just trying to get their job done. They're not just trying to do it because they can. It's because they're just trying to get their job done. And if we make our controls too demanding, or they don't understand why, they're gonna go around you. So of course there are controls you can put into your environment. You can put supplier review processes into place. You can work with your finance teams and make sure that if something, what Lee was talking about earlier, Special Agent Eves was talking about earlier, was if you go straight to the source, go to the finance team. If it's a line item and it wasn't approved by the supplier review team, why is finance paying for it? It's a question, and so you build those relationships back with the business. You not only understand what their needs are, but you can also help them meet their needs.
Yeah, and I would add too, I mean, partner with your legal team, partner with your procurement team, make sure there's concessions in there around SLAs and around what happens when there's a breach, and make sure that you're ready for that. We have a HISAC subscription, and one of the things they provide on a daily basis is a ransomware email. So they tell you all the companies that have been ransomed, not only healthcare, and we always bounce that against what our third parties are to see, because sometimes they're not going to notify you or notify you in a timely fashion. So pay attention to that kind of stuff. Make sure you're looking at that as well and what that impact is going to happen when something bad really happens.
So let me add on to that real quick. We can get involved earlier by not being the department of no. Mm-hmm. Right? And it's easy for us to say no. The better way to do it is to say yes, but in a secure fashion. Let me show you how. A simple thing. Talked about vetting vendors. I moved the process of the security department doing the vetting after the purchase to before they were even getting into the requirements gathered. When we did that, we discovered one immediately, which was the pharmacy, compound pharmacy, that the hospital was using, lost their accreditation. Then they decided, oh, we need to go to somebody now. Okay, I get it, but let us take a look at them and see what's going on. Well, the business didn't understand, I need multi-factor authentication. I need individual accounts, not one that we share to everybody. We all know those are bad things, but does the business, right? By getting involved, we were able to say, okay, we'll go with them. I get it. It's one of the only providers left, but we'll put our MFA out in front of them. And then they will commit to us when they will get that available. And then we will enforce the nature of, no, individual accounts. I'm sorry, but you have to do that for us. And that was a simple thing for them to do. They were just being lazy. We needed to force them to do it. Sorry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, I mean, you bring up good points as well, and Roger, you brought up good points as well. I think one of the things in that, or one of the through lines through that, is when we have conversations around, no, we're not the Department of No, we haven't been that in a long time. Like, let's be real, we've said it a lot over the panels, over the years, and in the conversations we had. If you still think that we're the Department of No, and you still think that they're the Department of Stupid, then we've got problems, right? That's a relationship problem. We need to address that, and we need to continue moving forward in a more human nature way. However, when you do have things that come to you, and you're saying yes, but, right? Yes, and the important thing is that sometimes we can absorb a little bit of risk, but look at it from a different angle and try to mitigate that risk. You had a perfect example of being able to look at a problem, having the conversation of why we need it, having an understanding of why the business needs to have that fix, and then understanding what those risks are and working with the business to put controls in place to reduce that risk, even while accepting the maybe not so great thing for the moment, but you have a mitigation in place, and then you have a long-term remediation plan. So whenever you're thinking about third-party risk management, those are some of the solutions you can have. Not every vendor is going to have a perfect security. You don't have perfect security, and by the way, how many of you are suppliers to other people? Raise your hand. You are. You sell a product, if it's a service or a product, a physical product or something to that nature, you, as a company, if you work for an organization, you are a service to someone else. We are all part of the chain. So none of us are perfect, right? So mitigating the things that you can't potentially control or the risk that you do have to absorb. I appreciate it. You brought up regulations. So I want to talk a little bit more about laws, right? There's oftentimes when we talk about laws, and then we oftentimes move directly to frameworks because there's a difference between those two things. So in healthcare, we have laws like HIPAA, right? Privacy laws also have security adaptations that are required globally through the states as well. FTC has specific laws of making fraudulent claims that if you say it online, you have to adhere to it. There's a lot of different things that we have to consider from a legal perspective, not a framework perspective. So whenever we dive into this, we'll move on the regulatory side, maybe dip a little bit into the framework side. But frameworks are more things like ISO 27001, right? So HIPAA, HITRUST is a certification, but HIPAA is the law that we adhere to. So I just kind of wanted to note that before we dig into it, but I just wanted to throw it up. And Melissa, I think you are
I'll
the
start.
first one.
So we mentioned GLBA a little bit earlier. That's basically protecting financial data, right? She mentioned HIPAA, which is protecting health data, and then there's FERPA, which protects student data. So for a university, we have to cover all three of them and more, right? So you have federal laws. Every other different organization has probably their own set of federal laws that they have to follow. But then on top of that, you have state laws that you have to follow. Like Tennessee, we have like privacy state laws that we have to follow, right? So you have to find a way to follow your federal laws and your state laws when, since you mentioned it, I'm going to bring it up, when you're choosing your frameworks, right? Because everybody wants to go to NIST or ISO and they want to follow the best frameworks. But when you're choosing that, that's fine, but you need to make sure you are fully covering what you are legally obligated to cover. I am thankfully report directly to legal, so I kind of get to have full conversations with them about that. So it's very beneficial for me. But you need to make sure that you, as a security person, as you're bringing in these frameworks, you're stopping and you're reviewing everything. And if you don't know it, that's understandable. You need to make sure you reach out and find someone that does know it, that can help you with this, because there's a lot of laws out there. There is a lot, and I can't imagine. I probably don't know them all as far as the organization, but I know enough in my area that I have to control. And so when I have questions, I reach out to the person that does know that stuff for me. So you need to make sure you have a good communication with all of with your business, right? With the people of your business organization, because each areas of your business also has certain laws and obligations that they have to follow as well. Financial aid for a university has, like, I know what they follow, but they have their own little special areas that they follow, as well as IT and as well as the legal counsel. So you just need to make sure you find the right person to communicate with and get that information before you start implementing new things. Anybody want to add anything? Oh.
Sure, I'll just, yeah, you covered pretty much all of it. But I would say, check your policies as well. Make sure you're covering regulatory compliance in your policies. One thing for us, and I'm kind of pushing this with my team, and they'll probably laugh about that, but when it comes to being audited after potentially an incident or an event happens, and you need to find all the policies that specifically relate to that, and then you realize too late that you're missing some of the policies because you didn't cover all the regulations in your policies. So take a gap analysis. You can use AI to do that. And we'll leave it at that. I think zero trust helps as well.
Just make sure that you don't use AI. You don't use AI to put personal information or sensitive information of your business in it unless you have a contract in place that allows that. Quick disclaimer. I actually...
You said that 3 times.
I will say when we're looking at regulations, it's your statement on making sure it's embedded into the policies. I see that a lot. One of the nicest things I've seen in policies was they actually had at the bottom each one of because you have policy, you have procedure, you have standard, you have guidelines. Like there's difference between those things if you don't know what they are. If you're in security, I recommend you looking up what all those different things are. But in the policy itself, the policy quoted what it was supposed to be adherent to. So you could actually see there was a mapping to each statement in the policies that said this is to high trust in the exact point in high trust. This is to HIPAA regulation XYZ, right? So that was one of the nicest way that I've ever seen, being able to directly map it back. And then, of course, having conversations from a financial perspective, that really helps, because then you're like, this is what we're trying to adhere to, this is why we're trying to adhere to it, and this is the financial backing that I need, and these are the reasons why. So I just want to add that in as well.
So let me add to that, to say the laws are great as far as regulations. We understand why. But let's also understand that to the point of setting policies and procedures and controls. Technology, that's not a control. Technology is a way to execute upon a control you've put in place. But we cannot put the technology in place and just let it run without monitoring it and making sure it gets executed appropriately, right? So the program of the policies, the procedures, the standards, and so forth are what inform how you configure that technology and how you use that technology to help you. Compliance, okay, way overused. Too many people just use it as a checkbox and move on. It's really there for us to gauge how well we're doing, right? And really, we need to also consider what could affect us in the near future. So HIPAA has been called out. But in Congress right now, there's a CyberSecurity Act going through that is evaluating whether they want to put more teeth, or they're going to add more regulation, or they're even going to bring up a different agency, which adds complexity. Now you've got the OCR and maybe another agency involved. It becomes very, very complex. So let me ask, how many of you think you are touched by GDPR? Okay? Curiously, why?
Clients in Europe.
Okay? Excellent. What if you don't have a business in Europe?
Does the personal data...
If we have a patient that is from that location, then we are governed.
Yep. Well, or user, client, right? If someone uses your service from that country under GDPR, they are protected underneath of GDPR. So you have to be really careful with that. Now, the only caveat to that is whether or not you are marketing it as such, right? So if you don't make it available to that market, there's a little bit of a difference there, and you have to work with your lawyers to understand that, but there is caveats to that because they can't just jump on a VPN and then use a United States IP address and start using your service and then demand GDPR rights, right? Like, there are some legal protections in place for different countries to not adhere to GDPR if they're not marketing to and servicing on actually servicing the country. But if you are servicing the country in any way, then yes, you are under GDPR.
And the last thing I'll put out there is, it's not our responsibility to understand exactly what to do with the risk. It's our responsibility to present it to the board of directors. It's our responsibility to say, this is the priority of risk I've identified, now I need your help, right? And I've seen too many organizations and too many people say, well, I'm not going to get budget for that, so I'm not going to bring it up. Now you're taking on risk personally. So don't let that be a problem. Bring up the risk, allow your organization to understand the priority, the risk register, and then work on it.
So two things. One, we really should have done business as the keyword, or business enablement, and then we would all walk out of here just smashed, because I think we use that word a lot today. Two, you brought up ISAC. If you aren't familiar with your ISAC within your industry, highly recommend that you look into it. Fantastic resources for your industry, potentially even cross industries. They're amazing. So absolutely look into your information security exchanges across the board. And I think we're going to move into, because I think we only have about 10 minutes left, so I think we're going to move into my favorite part, which is we have 9 minutes left. I was corrected. Thank you so much. I'm going to move into questions. So questions from the audience. Do we have a mic anywhere that we want to get moved around?
Yeah, we're taking questions on AI, zero trust. Any questions from the audience?
I mean, you have some incredibly talented and intelligent people up here to ask questions and get advice.
So my question was for Marc, especially since it seems to be a passion of yours about the, especially the vulnerabilities, and you talked about that, right? That there is an act going through law right now. But for the European government, they actually did put one in place for vulnerabilities within software. Like, do you think that's a good thing, a bad thing? Kind of just your thoughts in general on like that and how that could impact an organization as it comes to the U.S.
So
potentially.
the biggest thing is with regulations, they're well-intentioned. What I find too often is, like with this one that's going through Congress now, have they considered the complexity that the end user has to go through to get to certification, to get to compliance with what they're going to roll out? I don't think they've considered any of that. I think they've seen the headlines and simply said, well, we need to do something about it, right? Instead of evaluating, okay, what is the OCR doing today? Well, are there things, and forgive me for saying this, Roger, I think the OCR needs to get more active in doing audits and testing what's going on. But I mean, what it really comes down to is our program is our program. And so that should be easy to get through because you're doing it with payers and everybody else today. It's just another audit. Now we have GRC to handle it. So the implication really comes down to it's not just one of us, but we need to also understand from the business level, from the business level, we need to understand the complexity of complying and make sure we let those lawmakers know, don't make it overly complex so you put the burden on the end user, on the organization, rather than protecting that organization. That's where regulations fall short, is they don't protect us.
Do you guys foresee your organizations, or have you heard talk around your circles of, the problem of sending data to the cloud, to an artificial intelligence, or hosting one internally? I said artificial intelligence, not AI.
There's a lot to unpack in that question. Oh no. Oh no. I think there's a lot to unpack with that question. We've been doing cloud for a while. So I'm going to kind of take that one to the side, because AI and cloud are two very different things. And those are two very different conversations and topics. So I'm going to put cloud to the side for a moment, because is it more AI that you're talking about, or the cloud?
Taking data to the cloud, taking data to the AI, or taking the AI.
Oh, you meant, okay. So much to unpack there. There's a lot of considerations, and one, what do you mean by AI, right? Like, what model are you talking about? What version, and what are you using it for? So there's that. But if you have the right relationship, third-party risk management, right? If you have the right relationship with a company that does AI modeling, and you are using their models to be able to help you do things within your organization. And I'm not talking about using a product with AI. I'm talking about using an AI model to do things for you. You can develop that relationship with an AI company. Now, you do have to also do your research and find out, how did they develop their model, off of what data sets did they develop their model off, what is their rates of failure, things to that nature, and then understand what kind of environment, just like if you were put it in a cloud environment, understand what kind of environment, and make sure that you have the right contracts in place, and you have the right agreements, and that you've vetted and tested and did risk management on it. There is a world in which you can have a relationship with AI and be able to house your data within their data sets, within specific guidelines and agreements. Now, there is also benefit that you have it in your own house, because you don't have to worry about all that contractual. You don't have to worry about, well, maybe they're not doing it, right? Because just like your businesses take risks too, right? They make decisions in their company, and sometimes it may not be what your contract says. And so you are taking a risk to your business for that. So bringing it in-house kind of helps with that, of course. And the other thing, kind of think about within bringing it in-house, though, from the negative perspective, is that you limit your data set. You limit the learning capabilities that you have, and you potentially have it feed back in potentially changing the data to a negative degree. So you have degradation of the AI model. So there's just some of the things to think about. That's a lot to unpack, so I'm going to kind of leave it there for me, but I'm just curious if anybody else wanted to.
Yeah, I'll add to that to say AI is good, but we need to put guardrails around it. So decide up front whether you're going to anonymize the data when you send it up, because maybe it's being intermingled, right? If it's going to be a part of a model learning with every other piece of data out there, maybe you want to anonymize it. If it comes down to you're doing it on your own tenancy, that's a different story. But you still need to define within your organization what the guidelines are for what you put up there, how you put it up there. Come up with a common data model in the first place, because what often happens is you're getting it from 10 different places, so there's no consistent data model.
Yeah, I think we got time for one more question. I think we have about 2 minutes.
We actually got 10 more minutes. I'm sorry.
This is great.
I need a refill now.
So you all were talking earlier about the risk that you have. You all were talking earlier about the risk that you have from your third-party contractors. And of course, I know your healthcare. I think your healthcare. I think your healthcare, right? So
Welcome to Nashville.
No, welcome to Nashville. But And so you have huge risk, just like other industries, but you have huge risk from data breaches and hacks. And so are you able in your third-party contractor agreements to secure indemnification and defense from them when the breach is their fault?
Yeah, I would say definitely there are ways to do that, and that's where including legal and procurement in on that, and even risk to give the language in there. We pretty much have a template with that, but if we think it's a greater risk or something like that, to put that in there. And without that information, and that's why, I mean, keeping up on third-party risk is so important, because if you don't and your contract is 3 to 5 years old, like we know it's a different environment 5 years ago. So it's, that language is probably not in any of those contracts that you would have today. So have a regular review process around that, and get some process around that.
Yeah, and also there's a legal requirement for business associate agreements. So anyone processing data on behalf of a covered entity and then thereafter, like fourth chain, fifth chain, are required to sign a business associate agreement. And there are templates out there that a lot of us use. We've adapted, we've cheated, and we've carved out from other people's PAAs as well. And we're like, ooh, that's great language. Let's use it in mine. And so there is specific requirements within that they have to adhere to all of the things that you are responsible for, and they have to be HIPAA compliant. And so that's a big helper within that component, is just relying on those BAAs and also making sure that the rest of the contract is up to the standards in which you would require, right? But the BAA covers a good chunk of the requirements from a regulatory perspective.
We're getting the hook from the boss.
We don't have 10 minutes.
One more question. Darren, sure. Can we do Darren? Darren's been having his hand up.
I think we need a drink just because of that.
Maybe I don't like it.
We didn't get thrown at. Where did the...
Yeah, you didn't throw anything at us.
So I have statement of fact. We have gotten to where we've outsourced and SaaSified so many things. And the beauty of that is we can present that in a budget that shows, hey, we're either reducing internal costs or we're increasing capability. But have we put into that calculation, that budget, what it's going to cost us to manage that outsourced service? No matter what, we haven't. Fight me. And so therefore, we have all these things outsourced. All those things that you talked about. I did a BIA assessment for a client recently, and 70% of the 70 teams that I talked to used Salesforce, and the other 30% were starting to, were moving to using it for something or another, and no one knew how their data in Salesforce was backed up, how they could replicate it, how they could redo it. We could just keep outsourcing everything, and we can keep increasing our risks. Are there any efforts that you've seen to start to budget in what it's going to take to manage those outsourced services? Because you can't, you have to inspect what you expect. So that's...
So I would say cloud posture management, security cloud posture management, or I think it's technically cloud security posture management, is an effort to do that, yes, in the aspect of understanding the posture of those SaaS things and providing you then also with the cost of managing that complexity. The underlying issue really comes down to understanding the shared security model between you and that provider. Because all too often people head into cloud with infrastructure as a service, not understanding it's almost the same thing as being on premise. But they assume the cloud's protecting them. It is not. So we have to make those very definitive understandings. Put it down on paper if you have to. This is what you're responsible for. This is what I'm responsible for, right? There's a lot of that needs to happen, but cloud security posture management is a wave that's heading in that direction.
Talk about indemnification language in contracts. That's great, but your name's still in the name.
Yeah, I mean, reputation's important.
Right.
I mean, I think you bring up a good point, Darren. I don't think, we don't necessarily look at that all the time to say, how much effort are we gonna have to put forth to manage this vendor, and what is that cost on top of how we do business? I mean, again, as we look at third party, yes, we've got a program and we kind of cover some of that, but it's not, the whole relationship is not covered in that, and that's a great point. And you have my vote for being on the panel next year for that great question.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah.
So-
Aw. I also do want to, like, I want to clarify one thing. Just because you use a supplier does not mean you transfer the risk to the supplier. Right? Like, you still have responsibility, and you're still going to have ramifications should something happen, and you need to be prepared to that. Love that. I'm being told to wrap it up. So we appreciate the conversation. Thank you so much, everyone, for your questions and the...
Sorry, everyone.
Yeah.
My poor sponsors have been here since 7 a.m. and we told them they could break down at 5 and they have flights to catch. So how about one more round of applause for our sponsors being so patient?